Well, this is an unusual time for sustain what, but good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are on this surreally fast forward planet. One thing we're going to talk about tonight is something that's moving fast forward that's actually kind of good, as Bill will happily explain. It's the deployment of solar, particularly solar photovoltaics has become a really cheap. And our house here in Maine, we don't have suitable environment right where we are for solar, but we get ours from one of those solar farms that Nexamp has built here in Maine. And but the planet is wrapped in other things too. We have geopolitical, political, climatic, and other dynamics that are really hard to grasp. There's so many dimensions. Bill, it's been a while. It's been years since we've had time to chat. So, first of all, great to see you again. The long distance skier of the climate movement. When I speak about you, I talk about that book you did on called Long Distance, I think, about that year of living strenuously. And you've been living your life pretty strenuously through this whole period. So, how are you doing given what's unfolded politically
Uh,
last year?
I don't know. Truthfully, I most of the time feel very I feel very sad um, that the country I knew seems no longer really to exist in the way that I knew it, at least for the moment. I don't pretend to understand the. I don't pretend to understand a country that wanted this man to be president, um, and uh, and is willing to tolerate the things that he's doing. You know, I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, and my summer job for many years was giving tours of the Battle Green. Um, and so I come by my patriotism honestly, telling the story of the beginning of the American experiment. And though that experiment has been always compromised in lots of ways, it remained one of the most interesting stories in the world. But I'm afraid that the story may be running out. Maybe not. We're fighting hard at third act and elsewhere to
Yeah,
stand up with all of this, but it's a tough period. How is it seem in your mind?
similar. It's a profound jolt to the system. I think I had never fully grasped the how much of what we consider the norms of our country as relying on values of leaders. That was actually there's a lot of plasticity. There's so few words in the Declaration of Independence and even in the amendments that it relies on good faith efforts to hew to the law, and that's what's happened. It's this sense of someone has been willing to push every limit in every dimension, and it's going to take so long for the system to catch up that grievous damage
Yeah.
is being done in the meantime.
I mean, the curious thing in my world is that though I think we live at a moment when there are more big bad things happening than I can ever remember, um, uh, I get to tell the story of the one big good thing that's
Right.
happening and largely unnoticed on the whole planet. And so it's been great fun for me. It's felt a little bit like, I have a kind of scoop to share with people, which I always enjoy as an old newspaper man.
Mhm.
And I think it also gives us a tool to work with that we didn't have before, um, and that plausibly offers not only some ways to at least start to deal with the climate crisis, but also to start to deal with some of the crisis around inequality and and oligarchy as well. I think we're at a potentially epochal moment in our path as a species, and so that takes some of the sting out of everything else that's happened this year. And since we're busy organizing for this Sunday stuff, it's a way to kind of stand up to all of it and see what we can do.
And we'll get into Sunday, the Sunday of action in a bit. I think one of the key takeaways in the book clearly is this idea that what used to be called alternative energy is a big boy, and getting bigger as you quote by the week, not just by the year.
Yeah, the by the week part is so interesting. I mean, it's just the stories are remarkable. I mean, there's a big story out today about how much of this is rolling out across the poorer nations of Africa right at the moment. Huge increases in sales of Chinese solar panels across Africa in the last 6 months. The rapid spread of Chinese EVs to the developing world, on and on and on. So it's a phenomenally interesting story, and I it's always a pleasure as a writer and reporter to get to tell stories, but maybe more so in this case. Because it has such potentially hopeful implications.
Yeah, what's you spend some time in the book on China and also on some of the trade-off issues, the Uyghur labor, etc. I know some part of you probably wishes this boom had been driven by the U.S. beyond the U.S. doing the fundamental 1950s research on photovoltaics, etc. How does that play out in your head these days?
I don't quite know how to make it play out. I've spent a fair amount of time in China, and there are things about it I like, but I wouldn't want to live there because, given what I've done with my life, I would have been in jail long ago.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I won't be in jail in this country at some point.
Yeah, good point. Bad point.
I think that for its many sins, China is nonetheless at this point behaving extremely rationally in regard to energy and the environment. At any rate, I think it's really interesting. You've spent some time in China too, I think.
Just very briefly, never dug in.
I've gotten to be there at a number of points in its development, including the times when it was at its absolutely filthiest. And it was pretty clear that it was politically unsustainable to continue to have cities like the ones they had. And I think that's one of the things that really started China down this path. But now they've figured out that it's, I think, the key both to the economic future and a route to a kind of political global legitimacy and leadership. It boggles my mind that we're surrendering the future in 6 months to China. It's not that they're eating our lunch, we're serving it to them. I mean, we've sent a crew of red-capped waiters off to deliver lunch to the Chinese. It's almost unbelievable, and it keeps getting more unbelievable with each day. I don't know whether you saw the story today that the Trump administration has demanded that the big offshore wind farm that's 96% complete off the coast of Rhode Island should shut down or never open because of, quote, national security concern. I don't know what,
well, it's their definition of an energy emergency is to stop production of energy.
Yeah, that there might be. I guess it's that there might be too much of it, and it might get too cheap. That's the emergency. And
Yeah, I'm a Rhode Islander by birth, so
yeah,
that really hurts.
and this really hurts because this was the chance for New Bedford and Newport and lots of other places to resume their role as important maritime centers, tending to the offshore wind industry.
Yeah.
I do think
I want to get back to China before, I did put up a slide here that, they are the ultimate, all of the above plus country when it comes to energy. They're still commissioning far more coal plants than they are retiring. So
yeah, they are, but
it's a market thing for them, and they're really succeeding.
It's super interesting to watch. They're using the coal plants less and less and less because, as any rational player would, when you have every day the choice between much cheaper sun and wind energy and more expensive coal energy, you only turn on the coal-fired power plant as the last resort. And that seems to be what's happening. And China's carbon emissions are now dropping, which is, not something I was sure I was ever going to live to see.
Yeah.
And ours, by the way, are headed right back up again. So
what's your take on, you have it in the book, you talk about Texas outdoing California, which has struck me so much, of course, back when I was at ProPublica, actually wearing a ProPublica t-shirt.
There you go.
We're not shutting up. And when Trump had first come into office, even then, Obama's clean power plan, there was, of the 22 states that were suing over the clean power plan, the Republican states, 17 of them were meeting the targets already. Even so
Texas is completely fascinating. First thing is Texas. Texas is now putting up more clean energy than California. That's true. California has done a better job with all of this, in part because they have things like building codes, so they're not using as much energy.
Right.
Texas is use as much as you can, generate as much as you can, but they are at least true to their free market principles. In that they've pretty much opened their grid to all comers, and it's it's so clear that the cheapest way to produce power for a growing Texas is to turn to the sun and the wind and batteries. That's where it's gone. What was really interesting was what happened this spring in the legislature. The fossil fuel industry basically tried to do the same thing that they did in Washington with success, put the kibosh on sun and wind. And the bills that they proposed in Texas were, on the one hand, everyone thought they would pass, even though they were, sort of nuts. I mean, the most prominent one was described by many people as DEI for natural gas. If you wanted to put up 5 megawatts of solar, you had to put up 5 megawatts of gas too. And they didn't pass because lots of people appeared out of the hinterlands of Texas to say, boys, this is how we fund our school system now in rural Texas. This is what's keeping the old folks home going. Don't do this. And so the Texas legislature walked away from it, unlike the US Congress. So Texas is a very interesting bellwether. There are other interesting, cross-partisan kind of moments here. You followed the rise of this balcony solar stuff in Europe over the last couple of years. There's now millions of Europeans who just go to Best Buy, put down 300 euros for a panel, bring it back, hang it from their apartment balcony, and plug it directly into the wall. And it's, they're often generating 20%, 25% of the power that they're using in their apartment. Well, it's illegal every place in the US for no good reason. except the state of Utah,
Right.
where earlier this year the state legislature unanimously passed enabling legislation. And the reason that they did it was because a libertarian state senator who I've gotten to talk to, he's a nice guy, an interesting guy, just stood up and said, well, if the people of Stuttgart and Frankfurt can do this, why not the people of Provo and Salt Lake City? And no one had a good reason, because this stuff is no more dangerous than putting a refrigerator in. And so now it's legal there. And that's the kind of thing that even though we can't do anything in Washington for the next 18 months, that's the kind of thing we can do in state and local level around the country, and the kind of thing we'll be pushing hard for on Sunday.
I want to focus more on prognosis, like we're talking now, than diagnosis. But do you have any sense that I guess you'd call it climate-centric, carbon-centric nature of the push in America through these past years missed people like this guy on the roof, and there's others. I mean, there's this wonderful.
Yeah, but I mean, Andy, the missed. I don't know. I think the way to understand the story is that for most of the decades that you and I have been working on this, the fundamental problem has been fossil fuel was cheap and renewable energy was expensive. And so the climate movement had no choice but to do things like try to drive up the price of fossil fuel. That's what carbon taxes were about, and it's why we did divestment to raise the cost of capital, went after their infrastructure expansion, and on and on. But 4 or 5 years ago, we crossed this invisible line where it became cheaper to produce power from the sun and wind than from setting stuff on fire. At which point the organizing logic began to flip too. So yes, now we're in a different place. And so that's why we spend our time, a lot of it now, at trying very hard to speed up this transition. In fact, absent the climate crisis, you wouldn't even really need to be pushing very hard, because economics will eventually do the thing that it should do. And yet, eventually is not much help, because we're now watching the destruction of the planet's climate system very much in real time. It's happening at least as fast as the pell-mell growth of renewables. So we need to speed things up, not impossibly. I think the IEA numbers sort of indicate we need about 50% faster build out of renewables to get back on a kind of Paris path. And 50, that's hard, but it's not an impossible number to imagine,
Right. So the price reduction, the mass production in China particularly, has changed the dynamic, essentially allowing less of the restrictive strategy and more. It's a little bit in line with abundance. I know there's lots of differences with it. Everyone has different definitions of these terms in their heads. But you're describing an abundance picture here, and you do in one part of the book. There's a line where you kind of push back at the degrowthers, and is that? It feels like a pretty epic shift to me.
Well, I don't know how big a shift it is exactly. I mean, I don't, as I say in the book, I think there's a very good argument not to be fixated on growth. And as you know, I wrote a book, Deep Economy, trying to understand the problems with our idea of growth and whatever. And I don't think that 100 years from now, humans are going to amuse themselves in the same way they do at the moment. I think that the culture of consumption is fairly empty one, and that we will grow out of it. But do I think we'll grow out of it in the next 5 years in a way that will dramatically affect the amount of carbon we're pouring into the atmosphere? No. 100 million human beings join what we call the consumer class every year now, most of them in Asia. I doubt that we're going to see dramatic. And I also think the other thing that was instructive to me was watching the real life experiment that came with COVID. That 3 month period, 3 or 4 months beginning in March of 2020, humans changed their lives more than any environmentalist I've ever met could have imagined. I mean, nobody flew anywhere, nobody went anywhere, nobody did anything, and emissions went down, but they didn't go down very much, like 10% or something. So I think it was a pretty powerful proof that the problem lies less with human habits at the moment and more with the kind of guts of the machine with which we all live.
There's a line in the book that really attracted me, because it's an issue, a part of this question that I've grappled with a lot. It's a more difficult question than can we do this is, can we do this fairly? I've written a substantial and had many shows here on the idea that our definition of climate justice so far has mostly been about the impacts on people and not about energy. It doesn't include energy justice. And I think you're getting at that here in a useful way. So maybe you could talk about this a little bit.
Well, I mean, look, the first thing to be said is everybody needs some energy. That's the world in which we live. And there's a lot of people who don't have it. I've spent a fair amount of time in Africa covering this stuff for the New Yorker over the years, and always been struck by what a miracle it is to see people getting electricity for the first time. I remember being in a village in Ghana on a very hot day. Right, it's near the equator, super hot. I'm a Vermonter, so it's hard for me. And they turned on their solar mini grid the day before, and we were sitting around talking with the elders, and they kept handing me bottles of cold water to drink, for which I was very grateful. But it took me about 20 minutes in my clueless Western way to understand why they were so proud to be doing that. It's because until the day before, there hadn't been anything cold in that place. And so remarkable. So at this point, it's abundantly clear that 90% of people who will be getting power for the first time in the next few decades will be getting it not from expanding existing grids, but from building new renewable energy. The grid is not going out to rural parts of Africa, but happily we now are able to build serviceable and increasingly powerful mini grids in all those places. And that seems to be precisely what's happening at the moment. Even today, big stories about the rapid spread of solar into Africa is sort of following the path of Chinese solar panels. So I think that's a big part of this story. I also think that there's a big part of this story that doesn't usually get told. We think about 9 million people a year die from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. That's about 1 death in 5 on this planet. There was a study today, came out yesterday, I guess, showing that even in the United States, that number is about 90,000 deaths a year. So as we weigh the pros and cons of making this energy transition, it would be a very good idea to weigh in those people too. But I think on an even deeper level, one of the things I really came to believe as I was working on this book, and that really interested me, was that the change is more profound yet than that. I'm kind of haunted by and by the question of what the geopolitics of the world would have looked like over the last 70 years if oil were of trivial value. How many wars, coups, assassinations, terrorist plots, whatever would have been avoided. Because I think that's the world we're headed towards. I think if we make this transition happen as fast as we can, uh, uh, well, humans are good at fighting wars about things, no question. But fighting a war about sunshine will be more difficult. And I
You're,
think that's
y-
the thing.
yeah, you're reminding me of my first New York Times byline was an op-ed after I wrote my book, on global warming, back in 91 or 92, or actually it was before. And it was imagining the Kuwait fires were burning, and I thought, what if it all burned up?
Yep.
What would that do? But
Did
look
it
what was
really,
on the
did it
page.
really run next to a mobile op-ed?
Yeah, no,
Was
isn't
that?
that? Only later did I realize that that ad had run directly next to my op. That says a lot about everything we're talking about.
It sure does.
Um, so yeah, so imagining a world where the geopolitics of oil and gas are not the driving force is a useful enterprise.
I mean, just think about it for a minute. I mean, Vladimir Putin is the biggest oil baron in Europe, and he's used his winnings to launch a land war in Europe in the 21st century. Our biggest oil and gas barons for years have been the Koch brothers. They have more refining and pipeline capacity than anyone else. They used their winnings to erode away the foundations of our democracy, making it far, far easier for Donald Trump to kick them over when the time came. So I am not a utopian, but I do think that this this transition has the potential to trend us in the right way in a lot of fronts. A resource that's available to everyone everywhere is a very different animal than one that's concentrated in a few places. And it was that concentration in a few places that really began the extreme concentration of wealth that marks our world. John D. Rockefeller was the first guy quite like that on the whole planet.
Yeah, and I'm going to show this is some of the good news that's in the book from Ember, who track this kind of trend, and you can see solar and wind boom pushes world past 40% clean electricity.
Is it on your end? I don't think it's me.
Okay. And it's a pretty remarkable graph. At the same time, and you did mention you're not utopian about this. This graph does keep coming up. This is all of our energy, not just the electricity. And obviously, as we eat away and electrify more and get more of that stuff that we electrify powered through renewables or nuclear, this will change.
Yeah.
But it's still an 80% fossil world.
And that's what has to change and fast. It's why I'm encouraged by the leading places here. California is using 40% less natural gas to generate electricity than they were 2 years ago. That's a huge shift. That's as good a number as I've heard in all the years that I've worked on this, because California is the fourth largest economy in the world. And really, the other thing that's really exciting to me at the moment is the rapid transition, not only in the way that we generate energy, but the way that we use it. I know that Donald Trump has decided to do away with the EV mandate and all of this, but I don't think he can materially slow down the global conversion to electricity for transportation. Half the cars sold in China last month had a plug, and that's what's dominating all of a sudden the automotive market in the developing world. 75% of the cars in places like Nepal or parts of Africa are now Chinese imports. One of the funnier stories I've read in recent weeks was that the BYD, the Chinese auto giant, is deciding whether or not they're going to go ahead with their car plant in Mexico near the U.S. border because they're worried that the technology will start leaking across the border. Americans will begin to desperately try and copy the stuff that, I mean, because these guys have figured out how to build $10,000 and $15,000 cars that work great, and Detroit's beginning to wake up. Even in the mid, people didn't pay much attention. Last week, Ford announced plans to retool a whole set of assembly lines so that by 2027 they'll be producing a $30,000 electric pickup, which is a big shift, especially in the face of all of Trump's rhetoric. And I think what it means is that Ford, which has a global presence, has figured out that they have no prayer of selling their current line of cars around the world much longer.
Yeah, no, one thing that became clear to me through the Obama, through the cycles of presidents coming and going with different congressional mixes, is the limits to U.S. presidential power in shifting these dynamics. Obviously, Biden with the IRA and even the infrastructure bill, which was bipartisan before that, showed some substantial things can happen. But Trump right now is showing some substantial things can happen in the opposite direction. So we have this whiplashy effect. But the U.S. at the same time is now something like 14% of global emissions.
I think it's even less than that. I think it's about 11% now. And we're clearly we're going to, if we do this much longer, we will turn ourselves into a second-rate technological power. We've canceled an awful lot of our scientific research.
Yep.
We're shutting down satellites and things around the country because we don't like what they tell us, and we're basically outlawing the cheapest energy technology in the world. The only thing that we seem to be all in on is AI, but that doesn't seem to be working anywhere near as well as people demanded, and of course the people thought. And of course, so far the really biggest effect of it is this increase in electric demand, which, coupled with the constriction of supply from sun and wind, is going to obviously drive the price of electricity higher and higher and higher. One result of which will be, even without the subsidies, more and more people will want to put solar panels on their roof.
Right.
And that's one of the things we're working hard at as we do this Sunday work in a third act, is around this question of making that much easier. As you know, Americans pay 3 or 4 times as much to put solar on their roof as Australians or Europeans. A little bit of that is the price of the panels with tariffs and things, but mostly it's the soft costs, especially those around permitting and licensing, which we do a terrible job with in this country. I just wrote a big piece for Mother Jones, just kind of laying out just how dismal it is at the moment, but it's easily fixed. I mean, there's an app from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the Solar App Plus, that allows for essentially instant permitting for contractors once they've scoped out a project. And it's already mandated in California, Maryland, and it's passed the legislature in New Jersey, waiting for the governor's signature. So that's the kind of thing we very much want to spread. And since you're showing the beautiful, beautiful website from Sunday, which people can find at sunday.earth, that's one of the reasons that we're doing this work, to try and press in localities, since we can't do anything in Washington right now, to press in localities to make it much easier to do this kind of work. And I think we'll have some luck for reasons that say Utah example makes clear.
Right.
But it's going to be a beautiful day with hundreds and hundreds of actions across the country. Uh, and the bigger hope, the kind of meta hope for the whole thing, is precisely that it will help people understand that this should no longer be filed under alternative energy in our brains. We need to change the zeitgeist in that way so that people understand that this is the easy, obvious, cheap way forward. And
The thing, sorry, one thing that I like about what you're doing here with the Focus Local is it actually resonates with what was needed under the IRA. I did a great interview with Jigar Shah, who ran that wonderful loan program that's history
Yep.
now, where he said, there's what's the number, 14,000 towns in America,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
we need a someone in each of those places to be the
Yep.
person who can go to the town council meeting and say, we can electrify our buses, and here's how.
Yep.
And so
Well,
you're building on something that was
Sunday is a big part of that, and that's what we've been building out at Third Act, which is this thing that I started 3 years ago for organizing older people like me, people over the age of 60.
Oh, and like me.
Yes, and we've got about 100,000 people now across the country doing astonishing work, and they're great at precisely that kind of stuff. One of the things that they've specialized in is, in state after state, learning how to bird dog the public utility commissions, which are intensely important bureaucracies that make huge decisions, but that have been protected by a force field of their own boringness for decades. Nobody but utility lobbyists ever goes to the meetings. Journalists don't write about them because they're complicated. But it turns out that older people have time. So on Wednesdays and Thursdays in some anonymous state office building someplace, there people sit with, a basket of knitting or a crossword puzzle book, but also paying attention to what's going on and participating in those. And it's proved to be very effective locus for organizing.
And the other value there is, again, if you have a place where you have a libertarian who likes to be on the roof installing a solar panel for completely divergent reasons, you can start to build those cross-cutting relationships face to face.
Absolutely.
That's
it's not. Solar is so interesting. The polling indicates that it cuts across partisan and ideological lines better than almost anything else. And I think it's because for conservatives, this notion that one's home is one's castle is very deep. I mean, I'm not particularly conservative, but I feel it myself. I think it's an American notion. And if you believe that, then, having your own power supply on your roof, it really does make it much closer to your own castle or fortress or whatever. And that's okay. That's a good, we can work across those kind of ideological differences without any trouble, I think.
I think so too. In fact, I'm tempted to show, it's so short that I'm tempted to show this little video clip that John Sutter, you may have met him at some point, the CNN, he used to be at CNN, went to Woodward County, Oklahoma, which university research had shown was the most skeptical county in America on global warming.
Mm-hmm.
And he did a bunch of stand-up interviews. This is 30 seconds. I kind of trimmed it to the key parts, and I think you should be able to hear it.
I'm not a real firm believer in climate change. Well, I'm employed in the oil field.
I have an oil and gas company.
If there's no oil field, there's no jobs.
Our whole economy runs on fossil fuels.
Now you might say the environment is perfect today because God ultimately controls the environment. we're going to try to have a solar system big enough to supply all the needs of our house.
That's the key line. Here's a guy, he's an evangelical creationist Christian who actually paid for the local park to have dinosaurs and kid thing. Looks like we all, and John went to his house and he showed the panels and that guy was never going to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, it's so this is a place where people actually can come together, and Biden did a poor job of explaining this, but a pretty good job of starting to make it happen. I think one of the great ironies of the world is that the largest solar panel factory in the Western Hemisphere is in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. Um, um, it's entirely it should be entirely possible to do this. Of course, the reason that we're not at the moment, and let's just be honest about this, the fossil fuel, a year ago, candidate Trump said to the oil industry, give me $1 billion and you can do anything you want. And they gave him about $500 million. That's how much they spent in the last election cycle on advertising and lobbying and donations. And clearly that's enough because he's given them everything. He's appointed a string of fossil fuel executives to high office. And all they're trying to do is destroy this threat to their business model. And it's really, I can't think of anything even closely analogous to it. And of course, as with so many things with Trump, I was just doing a little reporting for the New Yorker for a piece for next week. And Trump went and signed a big open letter in the newspaper sometime in 2009 or something, demanding that we have American technological leadership to deal with the climate crisis. And
I wrote about that long ago.
It is what's happening. I mean, it's clear that the three fixations of his presidency are immigration, tariffs, and renewable energy. And historians, assuming they haven't all been put in jail or something, will someday their minds will boggle at the at what we're doing.
Yeah, here's that letter, and Trump's name is right down in here.
Yeah, not only Trump's name, but if you look closely, everybody else just signs their name. He also, Eric, Donald Jr., and Ivanka owned it too.
3 of his children, yeah. It's what a world, and he's able to just still. Well, we'll see what happens. I've done several sessions on here on authoritarianism and how you reverse it, and unfortunately
it's hard.
It's really hard. It takes sustained work, and it's not just people in the streets that's essential, but also businesses have to kind of rebel, and the courts have to hold firm. And I think it's okay for us to have one moment of ranting. This is a meme I've been throwing around. What Trump is doing reminds me of the Ray Bradbury book, Fahrenheit 451, much more than 1984.
Yep.
The fire department is spewing gasoline instead of water.
Yeah. And in this case, it's been accompanied by this attack on truth that's so. I mean, nothing makes me as crazy as the apparent good chance that we're going to shut down the CO2 monitor on Mauna Loa, the single most important scientific instrument in the history of the Earth. And the reason we're going to shut it down is because it's scary. And he's, of course, managed to round up the all-star squad of ancient climate skeptics to produce a document saying global warming isn't real and isn't a danger. you knew all the people who were on that document.
Mhm.
The 5 scientists, you knew them 20 years ago. The fact that those are still the people that, that the only people they can find to, make this absurd case. It is a deeply discouraging moment, but the truth of climate change will out. I mean, look, the second largest city in America burned in almost unbelievable fashion 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And the economics of energy will out too. Whether or not he destroys the American economy in the pursuit of this madness, I don't know. But I think truthfully that the effect on the rest of the world will be to push them more quickly. Trump has been trying to, and with some success in the short term, to use tariffs as a way to leverage more sales of liquefied natural gas. That's how you get out of heavy tariffs. You agree to buy a bunch of LNG from his buddies in the oil patch. And that may work in the very short run, but I think in the long run, even in the medium run, it'll have exactly the opposite effect. What government on earth is going to want to be dependent on a country as fickle and erratic as the United States for its energy supply when they could put up their own energy system? I noted with interest that 2 weeks ago, Indonesia, fourth largest country in the world, announced plans to build 100 gigawatts of solar over the next 5 years, and did it to some degree explicitly saying they wanted to have control over their supply of energy going forward.
Again, the rapidity with which things can start to happen is something you convey in the book, and I think it's important to make these points. I think maybe for another session, there's this other area I think where we can have rapid gains as well, which hasn't historically been your focus, and that's fine because there's room here for multiple dimensions, and it's risk reduction. And as we've both said here, the transition here is still going to take a long time.
Yes.
Getting to anything remotely stable with climate, and at the same time, vulnerabilities are manifest around the world.
Yeah.
And I think Bangladesh is this great example where their mortality rate has just plunged through the adoption of things like radio, radars, satellite imagery, and simple fixes in villages. And I think
good organizing. You've spent some time in Bangladesh.
No, and I've done all my reporting remotely.
Bangladesh is one of the most remarkable countries on earth. I love it there. I'm hard pressed to go back because the last time I was there, I got dengue, and it's a disease you don't want to get twice, at least in the same strain.
I got it in Indonesia.
But Bangladesh, it was quite fascinating to be along the coast and see that the thing that had really happened was that they equipped the mosques as the kind of alert system. I mean, every mosque has a loudspeaker to begin with for the call to prayer, right. And now those have been repurposed as typhoon warning systems, and they've built this series of shelters and things to allow it to happen. I think that kind of risk reduction is important. I do think that the most important risk reduction we can be doing is trying to reduce the temperature at which the planet eventually settles. And though I do not think renewable energy can stop global warming, I do think it's capable of shaving tenths of a degree, several tenths of a degree, maybe more, off the temperature that the planet eventually settles at. And we think now, I mean, things are a little hard to study, but there's one big study from a few years ago that said that each tenth of a degree Celsius moves 100 million more of our brothers and sisters out of a comfortable climate zone and into a place where they're in danger of having to leave because things burn down, or their house is underwater, or it's just too freaking hot, which it's becoming in places just physically too hot for people to deal with it, so yeah, all these things have to be happening, but if we don't get the temperature under some kind of control, in the end, it's going to overwhelm everything that we do.
Yeah. Again, there's room for working on both of those fronts. To me, the immediate, if you have communities that where, like Christy Ebi at the University of Washington, a longtime IPCC author on climate and health, says nobody needs to die in a heat wave, period.
Yep.
Because you have time.
Yep.
And if you get ahead of that, and that there's a lot of work and opportunity there, that while the world is decarbonizing, has to happen.
Plenty of work to be done, Andy.
So good luck with the book.
Yes.
Good luck with Sunday.
People should join in. We're having a good time, and if if any of your listeners find themselves approaching their 60th birthday, send them our way at thirdact.org. It's great organizing with people of a certain age. I noted with some pleasure that Stephen Miller, the odious sidekick to the president, was complaining yesterday that elderly hippies were getting in the way of work in Washington, militarizing Washington, D.C. So I was quite pleased to see that, and I'm sure it will continue. So that's good.
Yeah, I'm gonna be 70 next year.
There you go.
So
there you go.
No, my wife has been involved with Third Act a little bit.
You're looking in good and robust health, which is very good to see, Andy.
But you have to do that in order to do the rest.
Exactly right.
Well, thanks for checking in from Vermont. Good luck with everything.
All right. Many thanks, friend.
And let's do this again sometime.
Indeed. Take care, man.
Take care.
Bye.
Hold on.